Hi, Ian Roberts and Mastering Composition, and welcome this week to my studio. You know, I originally started with the idea of looking at brushes and paint, of course, and then that led to the idea of, well, I should mention the pencils I use and how I sharpen them, and then of course the paper, and well, you need to understand the lighting, at least the way we've got it arranged in here, and then panels and canvas, and then that got to the idea of fat over lean, and that got to glazes and medium, and then signing paintings, and it just sort of grew and grew. I think it's up about 20 minutes right now, but the thing is there's a lot of good information in there, and I haven't put the names so often in the video, but all, not links, but the names of everything I mentioned is down below. And if, you know, there's some gaps in things I've covered, you know, we can get them another time. It's not quite the slick video production I had originally envisioned, but it's what I could do, one guy with an iPhone. So our studio is a 2-car garage, about 450 square feet, about a 40-foot commute from home. So there's my painting station and my easel, and then you'll recognize this from the videos where I filmed them, and then all the books and the flat files and so on. And then these are the 2 doors that used to be a big sliding garage door up the ceiling, but now are big barn doors, which let more air and light in. And then more books. This is my wife's side of the studio. So she's got some of her paintings here, and she has 2 lights above her easel station in addition to the rest of it, what I'll be showing you in just a second. Back to the door again. But then I want to show you the lighting, because lighting's important. We've got 2 north-facing, that bar is where I do the video for the palette, 2 north-facing skylights, and then a bank of lights, warm and cool floods, right up at the peak, 12 feet above the floor. Now, in terms of pencils, I use Blackwing matte pencils, and the matte is like about a 4B. And they look like this. And I'll show you how I normally sharpen them, because I don't stick them in a sharpener. I sharpen them like this. I'm looking at the camera as I do this, not at the thing itself. But I like a fairly long, now I've seen people do it so that their lead is about 2 inches of exposed lead. And to my mind, I mean, anyway, I would just snap the lead off in no time. But I like to get, and I'll show you why, a fairly long lead. So you just sort of keep taking a little bit off until you get a nice, pretty long piece of it. And then what you're looking to do is get that chisel. Now, those are for laying the big flat masses. Obviously, you can have a point and you can use this for a point, but you want to, once you've got this, just knock a little bit off the end like that, and you've got that chisel. And then in terms of paper, I like these 2 papers, Stonehenge Warm White and the Bristol, Strathmore Bristol Smooth Surface. I love those 2 for drawing. My palette is a 30 by 24 inch piece of glass with gray paper underneath. The paint I use primarily is Gamblin. Just so you know, nobody's paying me this week for advertising any of their stuff. That is a studio-sized tube, and that's what I use for everything in the studio, and then I use smaller tubes of the same for plein air painting. And I've gone through the list of colors before, but let's just do it quickly. We have titanium white, cad yellow lemon, cad yellow medium, yellow ochre, cad orange, cad red light, alizarin crimson, dioxazine purple, ultramarine blue with a space there for cobalt blue, chrome oxide green, phthalo green, and then 2 spaces there for raw umber and ivory black, which I sometimes use. Now you may prefer some other colors in there. I mean, I have a logic to the order. It's the color wheel, right? From yellow through to red, to purple, to blue, to green, and it's just like I've opened it up like that. So there's a logic to the order. But the most important thing is whatever colors you choose, put them in the same order on your palette. You've got so many things to think about when you're painting that when you can just put that thing into complete order, so that, like, if you notice my painting when I'm mixing, how quickly I'm sometimes grabbing paint, it's because that order of my colors has been there for over 20 years. And half the time I'm going for the color before I've even thought about what I need. It's like a pianist, you know, it's just that order is set. And it really is a helpful tool. Now, easels. I have a Capoletto, and I have a stand here where the computer shows me what I'm painting, so I can paint this. This is something that I just built. I had a bunch of jerry-rigged panels to hold it all together. But when you have a small panel on a big easel like that, there's nothing really to hold it. So this allows me to have different panels up until we get to about 20 by 20, and then it'll hold itself. So this is a crank. I really like this. I don't think they make it anymore to export. It's made in Italy, but Maybeth and Jack Richardson, again, I'll put those names down below, make large, good studio easels as well. My favorite brushes of all time are Manet from France, and even when you grind the heck out of them, they still really hold their form. But unfortunately, they went bankrupt a couple of years ago, and you can't get them anymore. So down below, I've listed all the manufacturers that I think are completely adequate and I'm still sort of looking for something to replace it. But in terms of size, oops, let me put this one here. I would have number 2, number 4, number 6, and number 8. And you can do pretty much everything with that. And then maybe you might have, I take a number 4 or a number 6 synthetic watercolor brush, just if there's details, and when they start looking like that, I just throw them away. And then there are my chip brushes, the ones I've shown you before that I do for the big block-ins. And you can sort of see them as they get older. The first time you use them, it'll just leave hairs all over your canvas. It's kind of annoying, but before long, that's gone the first time, and then that's gone. But look at this one here. When you get up really close here, you see the edge there? If you get paint, good thick paint, and you're just laying that softly on something else, you get some beautiful effects with something like that. And the only way to get it really is by wearing it out. In terms of cleaning brushes, supposing I've got this paint here and I want to get up, I use that thing on the bottom to softly sort of wipe the paint off and then wipe it. And I can still see there's some of this on there, so I'm going to wipe it off some more. And I'll do that 2 or 3 times, squeezing it quite a bit, making sure until, well, there's still a little left. By there, that's pretty much it. And that's the way I leave the brush. I don't ever use soap and water. I find that I can go straight back into mixing. There might be a little bit of mineral spirits on when I mix the next, but not very much. Or I could just leave it until the next day. And as I say, I don't do it with soap and water because I find it makes the bristles too soft. And I just like the way they feel after they've been cleaned about that much. So I use the paint on for, smaller paintings. I use Raymar panels, oil primed, Clason's double primed linen. And they come white, but I tone them different things. This is the color that I would have it most often. But they're about $12. And so if that seems pricey, I mean, you can buy those cheap panels that you get in any art supply store for a couple of bucks. And I'll show you how you can, because I hate the surface of them. When you're putting in paint, it just seems like all you get are little holes between each brush mark. I'll show you how you can improve the surface with acrylic gesso. And then you can also try, I feel like I'm, this is a can of tomato sauce or something. But if you can get, Gamblin makes one, Fredericks makes one, oil prime ground, you can try putting a layer of that on, because I like the surface, an oil prime surface. Acrylic is more absorbent, and some people prefer that. I prefer an oil ground, which is a little bit allows the brushwork to kind of stand out a little bit more. So you can just take some gesso, like this is a Liquitex, but any good gesso. Put put a little bit on a thing, then use an old credit card. This is actually a air miles thing for something I don't use anymore. And you just wipe it, and it fills in the holes. I find those things are really hard to paint on because there's so many little holes. You spend more time trying to fill the holes than you do painting. And then when you've got, I've put on a little bit more than you need here. Wipe some off there on a paper towel. And then you get a surface about like that. And then you might just go back one more time very lightly to get those last few ridges out. And you might do 2 coats like that, but you'll find that you'll start to fill those little holes up and they'll be much easier to paint on. I know I often get the comment that it seems to be so easy the way I put the paint on and I'm not using any medium. So I just want to show you how it goes on a canvas, cotton canvas, and a linen panel. And you'll see the difference and why it looks so much easier on the linen panel. The surface you paint on, this is just 12-ounce canvas with a layer of gesso on it. You know, you really have to kind of push a bit to get the paint in there. And if you're scratching like this, you're really not getting any paint on. You're really having to grind it just to get rid of the little white dots. Now the next one over is a Raymar panel, much smoother canvas. And you know, you can get the paint on there because everyone says, oh, it seems you get it on so easily. It seems to flow without a medium. But again, if you try to do this, you're sort of looking at grinding paint back in. And by the time you've done that, you've covered the surface. But look at what happens on a linen panel. This is Clasin's double primed. And you know, you get the paint on okay, but look at what happens when you do this. It interacts with the surface, right? There's no holes now. I'm playing with the brush mark on that surface so that I can my brush marks actually hold there. So it's worth perhaps trying it, but the first thing to remember is that the surface you paint on is a very personal thing and there's no right or wrong on it. Those washes on the left are lean. You'd have to put thick paint on there in order for it to hold. But this is thicker paint, right? This is alla prima, fat into fat. And you don't have to worry about this, just fat into fat. That's it, it works. And then let's talk about oiling out. Now what that means is different pigments absorb oil in different ways. And so sometimes you'll see that when you see your painting is dry and you're coming back to it, some of it's a little glossy, some of it's a little matte. And also the colors tend to kind of sag a bit. So if you take some linseed oil, maybe half linseed oil, half mineral spirits, and you put it on a rag or a brush, and you just brush it very thinly over your whole canvas, and then take a dry cloth and wipe it back. What it does is it unifies the matte glossy part, and it also kind of brings the colors out and just gives the surface a nice surface to be painting on when you've got a dry painting that you're going to work on again. So let's talk about mediums for a minute, because this gets back to the idea of thin paint, lean paint, thick paint, fat paint, and then once you've got good layer of oil paint on there, or acrylic really, what do you put on top of that so that it'll stick? Because if you just use turpentine or water in your paint, it won't stick. So you need a medium. Now, acrylic medium, that's fairly simple. It's not very toxic. The problem with the mediums that you get to use in oil painting is they're toxic. They smell really bad. So a common one, say, is liquin. It's modern. It's hard to be painting with liquin on your canvas and smelling that all the time. Now, I hate liquin as something to mix with paint. I like the thick viscosity of oil paint and using that. I hate thinning it out. But if you're putting a glaze on and you're just wanting a transparent glaze over something, you need something. So I'm going to show you liquin, and then I'm going to show you another thing which, well, I'll mention it because it's using, here I'll just get it, it's epoxide oil, and it's linseed oil that's been copolymerized. Now, linseed oil is flax oil, and we eat it, but the problem is it's very glossy. So when it's done, you've got a real problem with gloss. That's a problem with all mediums. You've got the problem of gloss in areas where you use it and no gloss where you're not. So in the end, then you've got to put a layer of varnish over the whole thing to pull it all together. So mediums start to get complicated, and really, I stopped using them years ago. I used to use this formula when I was making paintings back a long time ago using that. And then also, this is the one that I actually came to and enjoyed a lot, except for probably what it did to my brain cells. So let me just show you what glazing is doing and scumbling, because you may have had that term. And we'll just have a quick look at that. The main thing with the whole tradition of glazing is you use transparent color. This is a transparent orange or gold oxide. And just like you would look in an old master painting, you put the white down and then you put the glazes on top so it becomes luminous. Now you can put in colors that are dark and they would have their own quality that would be different from just painting straight. But that's glazing. And scumbling is taking an opaque glaze and putting two layers of color that interact together in a way, I'm just putting it on loosely so you get the idea. But now I'm using liquid here because it's just simple and it's available, but it's smelly. And you have to deal with that in terms of whether you really want to be working with glazes. One medium you might find interesting though is Dorland's wax medium. And you see that is laying that glaze in. Here you can see with a darker one, if it's too smooth, but you can sort of get a layer of color in. And Dorland's cold wax medium, there it is also really good for just laying in big, thick impastos of paint where you want the brush marks to really be showing. And the thing I like about it is that it's matte when it's dry. So when it's completely dry, you can kind of put a thin layer of final varnish on it and it'll just kind of pull it up to the surface of everything else. And finally, when it comes to signing paintings, I choose a color that kind of blends into the painting itself so you don't really see it and it's not very large. Or with a plein air painting, I sometimes just scratch the name right into the surface at the end. And finally, when I leave for the day, my palette and brushes look like that, ready for the next day. I couldn't stand coming back to something like this and having to go through cleaning it up before beginning to paint. So I'm back in my regular chair and it feels comfortable over here. As I said, there's a lot of information in that thing. So please do like the video if you enjoyed it. And I do understand that if I've maybe skipped over something, that it was just like it was going to go on forever, if I just kept expanding on every single point. If you have a question, just put a comment down below. Now, I'll read every single one and I'll acknowledge that I've read it, but I'm not going to type out specific answers. What I'm thinking is at another point, I can take and consolidate all those comments and make a second video. Or I'm also thinking to maybe go live one week. I'm checking out the technology for that. So you could be posing your questions and we could be answering them live. So that's something that I'm looking forward to doing in a few weeks. But I do hope you found it helpful. As I say, please do like the video. Of course, please do subscribe. And I will see you next Tuesday. I hope you have a great week and bye for now.